What's up, YouTube? I'm Mike. Today I'm finally back shooting what hopefully will be the last piece of this series on what it's been like to stand jury trial facing 12 years that luckily on day one was reduced to a total possibility of 7 years. So this is the day that it was finally time for me to testify. There has been some comments in the comments section about my attorney not doing a good job of representing me by trying to force me to take the deal. And while I agree with the sentiment that some of you have, that this is often the case, I have run into this situation, unfortunately, again, in a different proceeding, where an attorney tried to force me to take a raw deal, and I ended up fighting the case pro se. I know that attorneys do this, and I agree wholeheartedly with the statement that somebody made about how they have like little back deals with clients where it's like, you give me this one, I'll give you that one. And I'm not saying that that was not a factor in his negotiation tactic. I do want to, in his defense, clarify that Leonard, when he would come to the jail to see me, which really actually happened very few times, it was always to bring me horrific news. And so I'm an eternal pessimist, and when I get bad news, especially like, hey, guess what? Your wife's back to testify and they've amended the charges to 144 months. I tend to immediately catastrophize. And when you're locked into a facility where you're completely cut off from the outside, you don't have easy access to the internet or to phones or to people, it really makes you feel like a caged animal, and it robs you of a lot of your self-esteem and your confidence. And so the person that you guys see sitting here that's very aggressive and well-spoken and able to put his arguments together in a cogent manner, the guy that Leonard saw every time he came to see me in county was this shriveling, near catatonic, shaking, nervous, racing pulse. He never saw me in the state that you guys see me in. So he probably was terrified that I was not going to, if I'd got on the stand and looked like I did when he was passing on this bad news, I mean, I would have been run over like a fucking freight train. So, or by a freight train, whatever. So the demeanor with which he had become accustomed to seeing me in was nothing that you would want to put on the stand. He couldn't possibly know all the fight that was basically hiding inside of me. And that's sort of my MO, is that I catastrophize everything, I get real down on myself, I say the sky's falling, we're screwed, everything's going wrong, and then all of a sudden, just out of the blue, I'm like, fuck this! Fuck these people who are coming after us. This has happened with my wife and I many times, with our RV situation, with a number of our mortgage that, by the way, we just got finally worked out. I'm gonna make a whole video about that. People try to come at us, and my initial reaction is to kind of crumble, and then it takes a minute for me to still myself and remember that I'm the fucking one, and I'm going to go to battle with these people, and I'm going to prove my point of view to them. And so on the day that I was set to testify, they had gone through the holding cell process like I explained. And there's this little tiny room that you are put in when they're waiting for the trial room to be open. Usually you're sitting in this room for maybe 10, 15 minutes, and it's the smallest room you've ever been in your life. It is just there's no window, I don't think. It's just a door to the tiniest little room. The room is just big enough, it's got a bench in it, it's just big enough for Leonard and I to sit side by side, shoulders literally touching, and we could both maybe stand up and sit back down. I mean, this has got to be, I don't know, 3 by 3. I don't know. It's a very, very, very tiny claustrophobic room. So Leonard, at this point, has no idea what I'm going to testify to, which is my biggest complaint. What I wanted Leonard to do was I wanted him to be the one coming to the jail practicing my testimony with me, going over, like, you know, playing the prosecutor, going over all of the things that the prosecutor could do to trip me up. And he had pretty much refused to do that. Now understand, he's spending my dad's money. It's not like he's spending my money. This guy's getting billed out like $300 an hour. So every time he'd come to the jail for me to role play what could be 2 hours of testimony, that was going to be running up a giant bill for my dad. And so I think that's part of the reason that he didn't do it. Unfortunately, what that meant was, here we are literally 30 minutes from the moment that I'm going to take the stand, and he really doesn't have any idea what my side of the events are. He doesn't have a cohesive picture of what I'm going to testify to on the stand, which is one of the reasons he didn't want to take this case to trial to begin with, because he thinks he's got a loser. Now, things are going really well for us. So far, her credibility has been massively impeached, and all of the physical evidence seems to be pointing in our direction. But what he said to me was, look, dude, like, you can't just go in there and go, I'm innocent, you know, I'm an angel, I did nothing wrong, and expect these people to just take that at face value and let you walk out of here. There's just too much that took place. I mean, very clearly a fight broke out. And he's like, you got to admit to something. And I said, look, man, I have no problem admitting to the fact that I tried to hold her again. I tried to keep her inside the apartment. I think it's justified, but I tried to keep her inside the apartment, and I did strike her. I'm not proud of this. Somebody got on Jen in the comments like, oh, you're celebrating this guy who mistreats women. I'm not celebrating myself. No one is celebrating. All Jen was saying was that she liked the storytelling, the way I was telling the story. I don't think there's any woman on earth that is proud of my behavior. I put my hands on a woman. End of fucking discussion. There's no right or justification for it. I felt justified in the moment for doing it, but I should not have done it. It was a crime. It was a crime for me to strike my wife in the way that I did, and I have never shrunk from that responsibility. So I'm not here to tell you that I'm a fucking angel. Quite the opposite. I was just not guilty of the charges that they pressed against me. And that's one of the things that's become very important over the course of this video, is understanding, well, I'll let Leonard describe that, because that's one of the things that he explains in his closing arguments, is that there's a difference between innocent and not guilty. Innocent means you did absolutely nothing wrong. Not guilty means they didn't prove you did anything wrong. Our American justice system is not about finding innocence. It's about finding guilt versus not guilty. And that's what I have to prove on the stand. So I said, look, I have no problem taking responsibility for the things that I did, and then I'll throw myself at the mercy of the court and we'll see where it lands. And he says, okay. And he says, here's the other thing that's going to happen. George Apple is going to come at you, and he's going to come at you hard. And his goal is going to be to get you angry on that stand. He wants the jury to see, you've been calm and cool and collected this entire time, and he's going to try to find a way to make you angry. And so I don't want you to use the term anger, angry. We need to come up with another term so that anytime your answer would be, I felt angry, you've got to say something else, because he's going to try to get you to say that as many times as he can. And I don't know why this happened. Again, I'm not the agent of my thoughts. It was just there in my mind. And I looked at him and I said, exasperated. And he's like, yes. Yes. Anytime he tries to get you to say the term angry, I want you to say, I felt exasperated. I was exasperated. And so now you can see, like, he's starting to get excited. He's like, yeah, good. Okay, that's good. So he says, okay, we're going to go into the courtroom and I'm going to put you on the stand. And he said, this is not a time for you to go off in narrative like I do here. He said, I'm going to ask you very pointed questions. I want you to answer my question and my question only. Do not go off editorializing. I want to control what you say. So do not go off on a tangent. You answer the question I asked you, and then I will ask all the questions necessary so that we can get your story out and present it to the jury. So I got it. He says, okay, here we go. And so, holy fuck, it's like you've been training for this event for months. I've been role-playing this with my cellie. I've been pacing inside the unit. I've been running these thoughts through my head. I've been practicing my story. I've been replaying the night. And now it's game time. This is the fucking World Series. This is the fucking Super Bowl. I'm facing 7 years in prison, of which the overwhelming majority of those years are day for day, no good time years. I'm gonna do like 6 on 7 at a minimum. And so into the courtroom we go. One of the interesting things that's happened over the last few days is those cops that I told you about, that had been carrying me back and forth every time there was a recess, every time we went to lunch, every day before trial, taking me to trial, taking me back. Those same, I think, 6 cops, we'd walk that quarter mile back and forth together a lot. And they were chatting with me. And it was wild because in the beginning, they know they've got this guy who's facing 12 years. So they're kind of like, oh shit, this dude did something. But when we would get in the elevator after some of these hearings, they like couldn't contain themselves. And they would be like, so man, kind of went pretty good for you today, huh? And I'm like, yeah, I think it did. And they had kind of started to root for me. So it was this cool thing where they're hearing the same testimony that I'm hearing. And so they were kind of instrumental in giving me some mental peace, because those cops are not unbiased. They're very biased. They're used to seeing some really scandalous, dirty motherfuckers come through who've done some terrible shit. And so most of the time, the cops are very prejudiced against the inmates. And so to have 6 cops, some men, some women, where they've already started to buy my side of the story, and they're literally like talking about it with other officers, like, man, we're involved in this case, and I think this guy's gonna walk. Like, this is crazy, the stuff that's coming out. So they're literally wishing me good luck. They're like, you can do this, man. Good luck. So they take me into the courtroom. All the normal proceedings, occur. And my attorney, stands up and says, the defense would like to call Michael Van Dusen to the stand. And you could see from the jury that they kind of like let out a breath of like thankfully. I think these people wanted to find me not guilty already, but they're human beings and they've looked at a lot of evidence. And so they've heard a 911 call. They've seen her, they've listened to her testimony and her crying, and she's got scratches and a bruise. The apartment's torn up. And while all of the things she says don't add up, these people clearly don't want to be forced to make a ruling of this size without getting the other side of the story. So you could kind of feel in the courtroom that they were like, yes, okay, we're going to get to hear this other side, and that's going to help us hopefully make, I forgot to run my clock, hopefully make a better decision as to this guy's innocence or guilt. And so I walk up to the jury box, and so like I have to face the judge to take my oath. And so the jury's like, imagine they're sitting back there on my office bed that's back there in the background. That's why you always see that. This is where I come take a nap if I can't sleep at night. My wife's snoring. And so the jury's right behind me, and the judge asked me to raise my right hand, and my hand is just like this. It's gotta be. It's just fucking shaking. And I'm afraid that they think that that's a bad sign. So like I'm trying to control the shaking because I don't want the jury to see me being that nervous. And then there's like a voice in my head like, dude, you're about to testify to 7 years of crimes. Like, you're supposed to be nervous. You're gonna look like a psycho if you're not shaking. I think everybody in this courtroom is fucking nervous, honestly, at this moment. And so I took my oath and I sat down on the table and at the chair. And the judge gives me some instructions, and I don't remember exactly what they were, but they're not terribly relevant. And just about the decorum of the courtroom and not to speak until spoken to, shit like that. And so Leonard gets his notes and he gets up and he starts to elicit my testimony. And I don't know how much I really want to go into this because I already basically told my narrative. But basically, Leonard drew out that the key points of the event, that we had left our son at home alone to go drinking, and I confessed to the jury. I looked directly at the jury, and I was like, you know, I'm ashamed. Like it was a terrible mistake. It was a horrible thing that we did. You have every reason to hate me for it, but it is what we did. We left our infant at home, and we went out drinking. And so right out the gate, I'm not trying to pass the buck. I'm not trying to point the finger. I'm falling on my sword in every way. I want these people to understand that I'm not some angel who was totally innocent. I did some things that I shouldn't have done. I just didn't do all of the things they said I did. And so we go through the drinks that we had, you know, the fight that ensued on the way home. He elicits my testimony about the fact that I was trying to play a video game. She started the fight, that I wanted her to leave, that I confessed to her that I was planning on divorcing her, and that at that point in the argument that she became very erratic. This will be important later during cross-examination. We'll get to that hopefully very soon. So he asked if there had ever been times in the past where this had been an issue and the prosecution objected, and there was a sidebar, and it was determined that I was not allowed to talk about any previous breakups or threats of breakups that we'd had. And again, I'm going to save the reason why, but there was something that happened in our past that did not look good for Amanda. It was not good for her character, and they did some sneaky little shit to make sure that I could not testify to that on the stand at this point. So basically, we continued to talk about the fact that the fight erupted, that I broke the perfume bottle, that I brought out the clothing and saturated the floor, that she charged me in a fit of aggression in defense of her property, and I hit her, struck her once to knock her away from me, that I struck her on the top of her head, that it had staggered her, that I had kind of let my guard down, that she had run into my son's bedroom. And so now we're into the situation where we're the real nuts and bolts of this case, because what we're basically trying to do is we're going through line by line on the charges that they brought against me. So remember, I showed you this sheet the other day. What we're focusing on right now is the big hitter on this charge, which is assault 2 with a deadly weapon. That's the first thing that we've got to get rid of, because that charge carries the most amount of prison time, is the most damaging to our entire case. And so Leonard has me walk through the events where Amanda has gone into the bedroom and she has picked up my infant son, and she's holding him in her left hand, and she's asking me to let her out of the room, which I refuse. And I tell her, you can leave, I will let you leave, but not until you put Adam in the crib. And she says, no, I'm afraid you're gonna hurt me. And I said, I don't want to hurt anyone. I just want you to put Adam in his crib, and then we will go out, out of the room and talk. And so she tried to push past me, and at this point, I asked the judge, could I leave the bench, the booth, the box, they call it, that I was testifying in, so that I could display for the jury what happened next. And hopefully I can catch this all on camera. He agreed, and they got the bailiff, and he's watching me. And so I get out of the stand, and I show, I'm probably going to cut my head off, but I show the jury that I have a handgun tucked into the inside the pants holster right here. And that Amanda's standing in front of me, and she's holding my son Adam in her left arm, and that she tried to approach me. When she tried to approach me, she attempted to push me out of the way. And when her hand went to push me out of the way, her hand, coming from the opposite direction that you see, hit the gun. Her hand hit the gun grip in my inside the pants holder, and it started to rise up in the holder. At which point I immediately reached down, grabbed the gun, pushed it back down into my holster, and left it alone. And so I was standing in front of the jury displaying exactly where she was in the room, exactly where I was in the room, exactly where the firearm was, and how it even became a topic. You know, I'm trying to, there's a reason she brought this gun up. She didn't just manufacture it out of the blue. The problem is that when the cops tried to get her to add detail, or maybe in her intoxicated state or her angry state, she just confabulated a bunch of bullshit. And so she told a story that didn't line up with the facts. So I expressed that when she moved the gun up in the holster, that I pushed it down to secure it. And then, of course, he asked me, at any point, did you point the gun at her? Did you eject any rounds from the gun onto the floor? Did you threaten to kill her? And of course, no. None of those things ever occurred. She moved the fucking weapon in my holster. I pushed it back in. She said to me, "What are you gonna do? Kill me?" And I said, "No, Amanda, I just want you to put Adam back in the crib and come out here and talk with me." So she agreed to put Adam in the crib. I stood out of the doorway to let her exit the bedroom. And that's when she went and she grabbed, the first thing she did, she didn't want to talk. She grabbed the cordless phone to try to dial 911, which escalated the fight to the next level. So I grabbed her, I got the cordless phone away from her, I tore it apart, threw it in, threw the phone in the two places. She took off running down the hall. He elicits all of the testimony about our little battle, back and forth in front of the couch. He has to ask me, of course, at any point in time, were you and Amanda in the bathroom? No. At any point in time, did you strangle Amanda? No. At any point in time, did you come into contact with her neck? Yes. Can you please explain to us how that happened? So as I told you, recall, that the prosecution had admitted all of these exhibits into evidence. So there was pictures of the apartment and all of these things. And one of the pictures that they admitted, which I had access to before trial, of course, one of the pictures they admitted was a color copy and a black and white copy of the scratches on her neck. And so I explained that the way the scratches were made on her neck was that when she got away from me from behind the couch and she ran to the door, I chased after her and I reached out to try to grab her and stop her. And when I grabbed her, my fingernails got her neck, and as she pulled away from me, they left scratches on her neck and broke the strap, I think is when that occurred, the spaghetti strap top on her shirt. And so I showed the jury, I was able to have the photograph passed around to the jury, and I explained, if you look in the photograph, you will see that the scratch marks are deep and consistent with fingernails in the front of the neck, and they gradually get lighter and narrower as you go back. These scratches are perfectly consistent with my version of the story, which is that I scratched her as she ran away, not that I strangled her with two hands. Because remember, the medical expert had already testified that there was no particular hemorrhaging. There was no ligature marks on her neck. There were no knuckle imprints, fingertip imprints, thumb imprints. All she had on her neck were scratches. This is not consistent with someone who has been strangled. Hopefully nobody in my audience has ever been strangled. But if you have, you will probably be able to testify to the fact that scratches are not typical in a strangulation case. There are a number of other things that occur. So the evidence that the prosecution input into the trial was the evidence that I used in my defense. I used the photographs that they took and the witness testimony that they put on the stand to prove that it was categorically and physically impossible for me to have committed the crimes they said that I committed. So I admit that after this point, Amanda exits the apartment, the condo. She's screaming bloody murder. I don't know what she's going to do. It scares me. So I'm standing in the doorway. I go directly to the coat where I get the keys to my truck. I take the gun out of my inside the pants holster where it had been the entire night. It was never taken apart in the bedroom. That gun never left my holster, which unfortunately, it went badly for me. So I testified that I had the gun in my holster. The second she ran out the door screaming, I went to my wool long coat. I put the gun in the coat. I got the keys to the car. I ran straight out the front door, jumped in the car, turned it over, and peeled out. So if you're in my apartment and you're looking at time frames, 45 seconds is what you would expect. It's a reasonable amount of time to walk from the front door to the living room, put a gun in a jacket, grab your keys, run out the front door, turn the engine over, and go. This is what you can do inside of 45 seconds. What you cannot do in any physical world that we live in is scratch your wife while she's going out the front door, then run from the foyer, down the hall, into a dark bedroom. Search the floor in the dark bedroom for 16 bullets that have been ejected from a gun. Find all 16 bullets, find the clip, feed the bullets one by one back into the clip. I was saying magazine and clip back and forth the other day because somebody in the comments said it's not a magazine, it's not a clip, it's a magazine. I don't know, bro. I don't shoot anymore, so it's just, in my mind, it's a clip. So I'm putting the bullets back and forth into the clip. I would have to put the clip back in the gun. Then I would have to run back down the hall, put the gun in my jacket, get the keys, get to the car, get peeled out in 45 seconds. Okay, there's no universe you could possibly live in where this makes any fucking sense, but this is what she and the neighbors and the detectives and everybody testified to. So the time frame that they put on the books was a time frame that once again only proved that it proved that things could have only happened the way I said they happened and were completely inconsistent with her story. So at this point, I explained that I left the residence, that I went to try to get a shirt, as I said, that I made a phone call whereby I did not threaten her on the phone, and I came home hoping to get my belongings and go to a hotel room where the police were then waiting for me, that I identified myself as the possible suspect, that I cooperated with all of their commands and was taken into custody without event, which was testified to by all of the police. So at the end of my testimony, I have concisely and directly proven every single thing that I said happened on the night of the event. And I backed up my story with the witnesses that they called, with the pictures that they shot, with the testimony that their witnesses gave, with the facts of the reality of the universe. All of these things were working in my favor to show that there was only one way these events could have possibly taken place, and it was that my story was true and hers was not. And so at that point, my attorney passed the witness to the prosecutor. So let me stop my camera right here because it's going to cut off, and I'll come right back with the cross-examination, which is the absolute best part of this entire case. Whoo! Are you guys ready for this? This is where I know a lot of you said you've been on the edge of your seat this entire story. I really appreciate all you guys listening to this story. It has been really good for me to get this out in this format. I've told this story millions of times, but to be able to shoot it and have like one kind of solid body of work that goes into most all of the details. I haven't been able to cover every single nuance, but all of the stuff that really matters is getting revealed in this video. So as I left you, I had just gotten through testifying. And so for the majority of the testimony, like in the beginning of my testimony, Leonard is sitting up in his desk and he's very nervous, you know, like he's engaged. As he starts to elicit the testimony from me and it starts to come out, you see him kind of just almost literally slouch back and he clearly starts to chill out. Like he's realizing like, my guy's got this. So I sit down, I leave the witness stand, I sit back down at the defense table, and Leonard is beaming from ear to ear. And this is a quote. This is what he said to me. He leans over, he kind of grabs me around my back like he was my dad. He kind of grabs me by my shoulder, and he said, I want you to know that 90% of the time, defense attorneys do not put their clients on the stand because one of two things happens. Either the client testifies and nothing he says really helps the case in any way. And far more often what happens is the client testifies and he convicts himself with his own testimony. He gets caught up and he says something stupid and he hangs himself. And he looks at me and he says, you just made this case. He's like, you did it. Like, and he's just like congratulating me. And I'm like, so now I'm beaming, you know, like, thanks, Dad. You know, I'm feeling all good and shit. And the half of the scary part is over. And so I look at him and I go, so what's going to happen next? And he says, well, he goes, they get to cross-examine you, but honestly, I don't know what the fuck they're gonna ask you. He was like, so again, like we talked about, you know, don't let him rile you up. He's gonna try to impeach your credibility somehow. He's like, I would hate to be in his shoes right now. I mean, you just checked every box on the list with your testimony, so he's gonna try to do something to get you worked up. But honestly, if you stay calm, I don't know what the fuck he's gonna do. So just, you know, he's kind of like, you got this. And so I think there may have been an intermission, you know, for lunch or whatever. And then, of course, go time. This is like the fourth quarter, 2-minute warning. It all comes down to this. So far, over the course of these days, jury selection has gone massively in my favor. Witness testimony has gone massively in my favor. I've just taken a stand and put together the most direct and obvious and neatly presented case that checks every box for every piece of evidence. It answers all the questions that she can't answer. It fills in all the I don't knows and the whys and the wherefores. And so the jury, the whole time they are like eating out of my hand. They are listening to everything that I'm saying. There's a lot of head nodding and they really seem to be on board with me as well at this point. And so I take the witness stand again, and this little worm of a man, George Apple, comes up and he's got his suspenders on and he likes to open his jacket and show off his suspenders and get his thumbs in there and show everybody his little suspender. I don't know what the fuck that move is. But oh yeah, but before I get to that, there was one more piece that I forgot. So before I take the stand, there was another piece of evidence that the prosecution decided to admit into evidence. And the piece of evidence that they wanted to admit was my journal. I couldn't fucking believe it. They wanted to admit into evidence the journal that I wrote as a get out of jail free card, told her to give to the police if I ever got myself into trouble. George Apple petitions the judge to admit my journal into evidence. Now, I had already talked to Nahiski about this, and he had asked me what was in the journal, and I said, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, it's all gibberish. And I said, no, it's not gibberish. It's just coded in what's called a visionaire cipher. And I said, what? They didn't break it? And he said, no, they didn't. He said they tried. They handed it to more than one agency, and this 2000s, they could probably brute force the shit out of it by now. But back then, they didn't have the technology, and so 2 agencies had looked over my journal, and they could not crack my Visionaire cipher. So they could not read the plain text that was written in 2/3 of the journal. All they could read was what I wrote that was not in code. And so he requests to enter the journal, and my jaw is on the floor. And so they turn to us, and Leonard kind of looks at me, and I go, yeah, like, we don't have any objections. And it almost like makes the prosecutor nervous for a second, like, why would, he's not going to object to this? And he goes, Your Honor, I would just request that it be agreed that Mr. Van Dusen cannot try to use this as an insanity plea. And I literally in the room went, pfft. And of course the judge was like, Mr. Van Dusen, you're going to be respectful in my courtroom. And so I was like, no, we're like, no objections. And so, okay, the journal can be admitted and it cannot be used as an insanity plea. Fair enough. So he calls me to the stand. I go back up to the stand. He's got my journal in his hand. He starts doing his suspenders, little strut in front of the jury. I don't know what the fuck. If you wear suspenders, maybe you can tell me why you guys are so proud of rubbing your thumbs down the suspenders. And like I said, this guy's demeanor is just gross. You just don't want to like him. He's just smarmy and grimy and weaselly, and he's like one of those guys that's like really arrogant with no good reason to be. He's not especially good looking. He's not especially built. He didn't have an especially good degree. He was just the special prosecutor in Snohomish County, buttfuck Egypt. The guy really hadn't accomplished a lot in life. And yet you would think in his presence you were dealing with the fucking Maharaja or Elon Musk or something. I mean, Elon's got way more, is way more likable than this guy. And so here we go. He says, Mr. Van Dusen, can you please explain to the jury what you do for a living? And I said, well, I'm in customer service for an industrial truck company. And he says, well, what does that mean? And I said, well, I work the North Territory, everything from the King County line all the way up to the Canadian border, and we service forklifts. We provide some building solutions. We provide some material handling equipment. We have an equipment guy who works with me, and he provides forklifts and material handling equipment, and he says, so, and he kept asking these questions, and I could feel he was trying to get me to use a word. And I kept saying words like present, we present options, and he goes, you're a salesman, aren't you? And I kind of look at the jury, and they kind of frown at him, and I go, well, yes, part of my job is to sell our services and products. And so he goes, so it's your job to convince people to believe what you tell them. And he was so aggressive with it again. I mean, he's assaulting me on the stand because I sell forklift service. And I kind of again looked at the jury and frowned, and I looked back at him and I said, sir, I don't know what you seem to have against salesmen. My job is to meet with a customer, do a site survey, find out what types of equipment they have, and determine whether or not we have the best solutions and services to fit their needs. And then he goes, so you're a salesman? And I said, yes, I'm a salesman. And one of the jurors kind of like gives a disgusted kind of scoff, like, what are you doing, dude? I've just put together this entire case, and it was clear what he was trying to do was he was trying to suggest to the jury that they couldn't trust anything that I was saying because I'm in sales for a career. And so I could see it coming. I'm no idiot, so I kept not using the word sales, and I just danced around it. I said other words. And so he says, so then his second line of questioning is, he says, Mr. Van Dusen, do you think that it's important to tell the truth? And I said, yes. He said, do you think it's important to always tell the truth? And I, again, kind of looked at the jury and I said, yes, I think you should always tell the truth. So there's never a case where you should tell a lie. And I said, no, I actually kind of am a pretty straightforward person. I feel that by and large, telling the truth is the way to go. So before we get to this next thing that he's about to say, before I was allowed to be put on the stand, if you recall, there was a certain event that I was not allowed to speak about. The event that was not to be discussed was the fact that when Amanda and I first got together when we were living in Dallas, Texas, I had threatened divorce once before. And when I threatened to divorce her, she barricaded herself inside our apartment and she overdosed on 30 lithium capsules that were in our apartment. She took 30 capsules of lithium and then barricaded herself inside our apartment. I had to call 911. She refused to open the door for the paramedics and for 911 to get into the apartment. They tried multiple times to be allowed in because they didn't want to have to bust our door open because we were going to have to pay for it. They begged and pleaded with her because she'd taken a toxic dose, I believe, of lithium. And they had to they had to kick the door in. Busted the whole jam up. I had to pay like $400 to get the door fixed. The cops had to bust the door in. They went in and she ran and tried to get away from inside the apartment, and they apprehended her, and they basically, what they did is they arrested her on a mental health warrant. They took her to one of the hospitals here in DFW, and she was chained to the bed for a week, detoxing. They had to feed her activated charcoal to get, I guess, to absorb the meds or make her vomit the meds, deactivate the meds. I don't remember. They said that she had taken enough that she was in danger and could die or have serious repercussions. And so they held her for a week or two on a mental health warrant, and they only eventually released her into my custody. Like, I had to sign that I was taking custody of her from a psychiatric perspective. I was her husband, and so they felt like she might be a threat to herself, but I was taking responsibility, and they allowed her to come back and live with me. The prosecution did not want that anywhere in this case because it went to her character. It showed that she had a history of being a lunatic, especially when I was threatening a divorce, which is exactly what I was threatening the night that this fight popped off. I told her that I had gone to file for a divorce, and so she had a history of that being a trigger word where she would go to extreme measures to try to stop it. And so the judge had said that I was not allowed to testify about those events unless the prosecutor opened the door. Those were his words. I didn't know at the time that this is an actual trial thing. There's like this thing called opening the door, which is basically if the prosecutor fucks up and asks me a question where the only way I cannot perjure myself on the stand is to testify about the thing that they don't want me to testify about, then he has opened the door for the testimony. So they can say, you can't talk about this freely, but if he directly asks a question and opens the door for me to say it, then I can say it. And so he says, Mr. Van Dusen, do you think it's important to tell the truth? Yes. Do you think it's important to always tell the truth? Yes. Do you think there's ever a time when you should tell a lie? No. And the jury's kind of like, where is he going with this? And he says, and so he starts reading, he opens up my journal, and he's real proud of himself. Like, he opens this journal up like he is getting ready to bring the fucking hammer down on me. And he reads a line from my journal that says, lie when you have to lie, tell the truth when you have to tell the truth. Now let me pull this up real quick because some of you may already know where this comes from. But in my nervous state on the stand, I didn't have recall of it. And I remember sitting there panicking like, oh my God, he just got me with the second question. He's going to impeach my credibility because apparently at some point I said that it was okay to lie. And so like I'm kind of like reeling. Like I feel like I'm free falling on the stand. And I said, and then he offered, he goes, would you like to look at it? Maybe that'll help refresh your memory. And I said, yeah. And so he hands me my journal and I start reading this. And as I start reading it, the smile comes across my face. The lyrics read, you had something to hide, you should have hidden it, shouldn't you? Now you're not satisfied with what you're being put through. It's just time to pay the price for not listening to advice and deciding in your youth on the policy of truth. And then the lyrics go on down and it says, things could have been so different now. It used to be so civilized. You will always wonder how it could have been if you'd only lied. Never again is what you swore the time before. Apparently it says somewhere in the lyrics, I believe it says, lie if you have to lie, tell the truth if you have to tell the truth. Basically what I had written in the journal was the lyrics to the policy of truth. And when I read these lyrics, I just like the most intense sense of elation just poured over my body. And I got this big smile on my face and I said, oh, yeah, I do remember writing that. And he goes, oh, so you did write this? And I said, yes. Can I explain why I wrote that? And he goes like this. He gets his suspenders and he turns to the jury and he goes, please elaborate for us. And I said, well, Mr. Apple, the night that I wrote those lyrics, I had told my ex-wife, we had been fighting, and I had told her that I wanted a divorce. And when I told her that I wanted a divorce, she freaked out, she overdosed, and he was, objection, objection, Your Honor, objection. And so the fucking judge calls a halt to the proceedings. He tells the jury to leave the room, and George Apple is losing his fucking mind. He's like, you warned him, you told him he could not talk about this night. And the judge is equally pissed off and he's yelling at the prosecutor, and the judge says to the prosecutor, I told you not to open the door. You opened the door and he just walked right through it. Now his testimony will stand. And he was like, bailiff, please bring back in the jury. George Apple was so rocked by this. He was literally staggering while he was standing up as if he'd just been fucking cold cocked by Mike Tyson. His entire case was about impeaching my credibility. He thought he was going to put me on the stand and trap me into confessing that I lie when I need to lie and I tell the truth when I need to tell the truth, and that the jury shouldn't believe me because right now I'm facing 7 years in prison and I'm going to sit up here and lie with every breath that I take so that I could get myself out of trouble. That's what he wanted to do. That's what he wanted to present to them. And in so doing, he opened the door for me to absolutely torpedo his entire case. So anytime a jury has to get suddenly ripped out of the room because somebody throws a tantrum, they don't know what's going on, but any human being can kind of figure out whatever just happened. The prosecutor did not want us to know this information. He was trying very hard to keep us from knowing this information, which all that does is make the information they just got carry that much more weight. This might have been something they were willing to gloss over, but he built it up in such a fashion and allowed me to fucking just punch it in his bitch ass face that it just gave it all kinds of power, and the mood in the court just totally swung in my behavior and in my favor. So the jury comes back in and they're like with bated breath waiting to figure out what the fuck has just happened. And so now George has to compose himself and he has to allow me on his time to assassinate his own character witness. And he said, Mr. Van Dusen, you can continue. And so now I'm about to fucking edit editorialized like you've never seen. And so I said, to the courtroom, to the prosecutor, I said, look, I wrote those lyrics because I was incredibly, incredibly upset. I had been honest with my wife, which I thought was the right thing to do. Our relationship was going nowhere. I wanted to end it, and I felt like I needed to be upfront and honest with her about that. And when I told her how I felt, she almost killed herself. Like, she tried to kill herself. And I was so upset that I had that effect on her that I was listening to this song, and I just wrote these lyrics because they were meaningful in that time, where I was thinking, like the lyric says, it's time to pay the price for not listening to advice and deciding in your youth on the policy of truth. I was feeling like I should have just lied. I should have just not told her. I should have just waited till I filed. I should have just tried harder to make it work. And so I got to sit there and explain to the jury everything that she did, that she had overdosed on medication, that she had barricaded herself inside of our apartment, that the police had to kick the door in, that they had to forcibly extract her from the apartment, that she was held for over a week on a mental health warrant, and that she was only released by the psychiatrist with the understanding that she was coming back into my care and that I was going to take care of her. And so, while again, at the end of the day, this had happened years ago, and it didn't have anything really to do with this fight, other than that you could make the argument that she has a history of not reacting very well to the truth. But the significant thing that happened is that it completely took him off his game. So at this point, he is just reeling. He is looking for anything that he can attack me on. And so he starts trying to put his case back together. But you can tell, he's red in the face and he's trying to compose himself. And so he tries to pivot past that, and he starts asking me all these questions about the night. How did you feel when you were sitting there trying to play your video game and your wife, to use your own words, is harassing you, she's yelling at you, she's trying to get you to listen to her, and you just want to play your video game? How did that make you feel? And I said, honestly, it was exasperating. I was like, I don't know what to do with this woman. Like, I'm just sitting here trying to play company heroes, and she's nagging me about this medical insurance, and this is what I'm testifying to. I'm like, I'm sitting here playing a game. We're both intoxicated. There's no reason. No good is going to come from any communication at this point. And she's just nagging me about something that all she has to do is just pick, like literally, the HMO or the PPO. I don't give a shit. The company's paying for it. Just look at the documentation and pick whatever you think is best for us and the family. And I said, so... And then she's turned this into this knockdown, drag out fight. And it was exasperating. And he says, so how did you feel when, so obviously you got upset. And I said, yeah, I admittedly, I didn't react to the situation the way that I should have. I certainly didn't want any of these things to be going on. In my extreme frustration, I collected one of the bottles of perfume that she had, and I broke it. I broke it on the floor. He said, you smashed it all over the floor. And I said, yes, sir. As has been testified to a number of times, and the jury's kind of laughing like, yeah, we already know this. I broke a bottle of perfume. And so then he starts walking me through what everybody already knows for like the 10th time. I covered it in clothes. And he said, so you throw her clothes on top of the perfume, and then you must have been very angry about this. You must have been really frustrated because you attacked her and assaulted her. And I said, well, I disagree with that characterization. I understand that that's what your witness testified to. But furthermore, as I've said, I was standing in our kitchen inhaling copious amounts of this pungent perfume, and she lunges at me And I just reacted, and I hit her. Admittedly, I struck her, and I was wrong to have done it, and I regret it to this day. I'm not proud of my behavior, but it is definitively what happened in the moment. And he said, "You must have been pretty angry." And I said, "No. As I told you, I was exasperated. I'm standing here in this situation where my entire marriage is coming unglued. And it feels like it's happening to me, and there's little to nothing that I can do about it. And admittedly, I've been drinking." He said, "How much do you think you had to drink that night?" And I said, "Well, a lot." And he said, "Okay, well, how much is a lot?" And I said, "Well, I had 6 doubles. I believe the bar tab was something like $68.17. And he goes, $68.17. And I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, 7 months later, sitting on this stand, you expect us to believe that you can remember the exact bar tab down to the cent? And I said, "Well, Mr. Apple, unlike you, for the entire last 7 months, I've been sitting in a county jail cell replaying nothing but that night. So unlike your witness, I can tell you every single thing that happened in very, very grave detail. So yes, I remember that our bar tab was $68.17. You could just feel the jury. Like every attempt that he's making to try to assassinate my character or to get me to act out or to build a case of any kind for him is just failing. Every single thing he's trying to do to get me to lose my composure is failing. At this point, I look up and Leonard, my attorney, literally is sitting with his feet up on the desk. This guy is kicked back like he's just enjoying the show because George Apple was like the lead prosecutor. He was like the big dog in Snohomish County. Like I said, this guy's probably had a very high conviction rate, and I feel very certain that he had never had a defendant embarrass him in the form and fashion that I was embarrassing in him, and he was not equipped to deal with it. It's like Mike Tyson in his first knockout. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's when you go out there and you just knock out every single opponent because you really haven't faced anybody, you get this false sense of self-esteem, this false sense of confidence. George Apple walked into that case and he did not know who he was fucking with. And he thought that he was just going to run all over me. And now things are going as bad as they could humanly go. And so, let me stop my camera and I'll come right back. So I think old George at this point is starting to feel like clearly he's lost his jury, which is the single worst thing that you can have happen. At this point, there were numerous occasions where in some of the back and forth that I can't remember all the details to, he was so desperately trying to assassinate my character with all these stupid ass questions like, are you a salesman? Trying to force me to say angry, trying to get me to not take responsibility for something. I guess he thought that I wasn't going to admit that I struck her or that I wasn't going to take responsibility for my actions. And so here's this guy who's sitting up here just telling a story that's perfectly consistent with all of the evidence. He's not succeeding in getting me upset. He's not succeeding in getting me to impeach myself in any way. And so he's becoming more and more frustrated. And the more frustrated he gets, the more kind of fussy he becomes. And the jury is now laughing at him. So there is more than one time where he asks a question that is so far out of left field that I literally shake my head and look at the jury like, is this guy fucking for real? And they're laughing. And so the judge at one point had to like quiet the people and be like, hey, everybody needs to maintain respect. Mr. Van Dusen, stop playing the jury. And it's like, I mean, what do you want me to do here? I'm facing 7 years. This guy's a fucking clown. He's reeling. I've got him on the ropes. I smell blood in the water. I'm coming after it. So now he wants to go into the bedroom and he wants to start making a bunch of accusations. And so he wants to try to create his own narrative and try to put words in my mouth. And so, we walk through the process about how the gun was lifted in the holster yet again. And he's like, but you pointed that gun at her. you did that. You know you did that. And at one point I said, Mr. Apple, you can sit here and you can yell at me all you want, but your yelling is not going to change history. It's not going to change the fact that I in no way, shape, or form ever intended to, nor ever did, point a handgun at my wife. That is pure fallacy, and the facts are proving that it could not have occurred in that way. And so then he wants to pivot to the bathroom scene, and he wants to try to get me to confess to strangling her. And yet again, it's like, you know, he just keeps trying to control the narrative and arguing every point that I make, but there is no point to argue. Again, it wasn't like there was no evidence in this case. You know, in the beginning, my attorney had said, you know, this is not a lot of CSI type evidence here, but there ended up being enough. There ended up being enough to prove that there was no particular hemorrhaging. There was no ligature marks on the neck. And so every time he tries to create a narrative, it begins to feel like the jury is just kind of running out of patience with his fucking shenanigans. The guy is just grasping for straws at every stage of the fucking game. And I don't remember exactly when it came up, but I think it was when he said, so you let her out of the room and she grabbed the phone and called the cops. And that must have made you very angry. And I said, no, sir, I had just agreed to let her leave the room. She had put my son back in the crib. I was hoping that we were actually transitioning the fight to no longer being a fight, to being a conversation. And so when she rapidly grabbed the phone, tried to call 911, again, it was incredibly exasperating. Like, and he goes, oh, of course. You were exasperated. You're just always exasperated. And the jury is like laughing their asses off. Like, what is this guy doing? He's now angry, visibly angry that I won't say the word anger. And he's telegraphed this punch. Like Dave Chappelle says in one of his stand-up comedy shows, he says, she threw a punch that I saw coming from last week. The entire jury knew by this point in time what he was trying to do. It was abundantly obvious to every single person in the courtroom that he didn't, in fact, have any cross-examination at all. All he was trying to do was to just paint me out to be some evil salesman who was very angry at his wife and somehow committed all of these crimes that there was no facts or evidence to prove. And he thought, I guess at a bare minimum, if he could get me to lose my composure on the stand, that would scare the jury and they would see in me what you guys have seen maybe during some of my trend rants, that there's some anger inside of this man and that she's probably telling the truth. But again, he didn't see me coming, dude. I'm a fucking business professional. Like I told you guys in one of my videos the other day, you guys see a trend rant, and I think some people imagine that just must be what I'm like all the time. That is not me, dude. That's just me letting go for a minute. I would not have been able to maintain business relationships for 20 plus years if I didn't know how to control myself and my demeanor in high pressure situations. So this guy's not showing me anything new. And once again, the second I smell blood in the water, I'm like a fucking shark. Okay, there's no reason for me to go into a frenzy. You're bleeding out. I'm about to get my meal. So I'm just circling. I'm just chill and circling. The jury at this point have basically, nobody's taking notes. Everybody's done with this fucking charade. I'm trying to remember desperately how he even closes out this. The last big thing that stuck out of my mind is when he said, oh, I remember one more thing. So he got pissed off about me being exasperated. And so he goes back to the journal, the fateful journal. And he picks through the journal and he finds a picture of Eli Manning. And he shows the jury this picture of Eli Manning. It's Eli Manning winning his first Super Bowl. And he says, you a fan of Eli Manning? And I said, well, honestly, I was a Peyton Manning fan at the time. I didn't really want Eli to win the Super Bowl. I wanted Peyton to win. But I am kind of a fan of the Manning family. And I said, honestly, I just put the picture in there because I thought it was noteworthy. It wasn't so much that I was celebrating his victory, but, you know, when you're a quarterback playing in the shadow of an older brother who has all this fame, and then you finally get your Super Bowl ring, it's a pretty big deal. It was a pretty big deal for Eli Manning, so I thought it was notable, and a lot of the things that are in that journal are just things that I feel were notable. And he said, so you wouldn't consider yourself a fan? And I said, no. Again, like I'm really more of a Peyton Manning fan, and as you see, there's no pictures of Peyton Manning in that journal. That wasn't the point. It was just, this journal is just a collection of thoughts and ideas that resonated with me in a moment, and so I thought they were worth saving, and that I could, you know, look back at as sort of a meditation, you know, later in life or that week or whatever. So then he gets this big shit-eating grin on his face, and he flips through the journal. He finds this other picture, and he goes, "Can you tell us who this is?" And he shows the picture to me, and I can kind of feel my heart drop a little bit. He shows the picture to me, and he shows the picture to the jury, and the picture is of Adolf Hitler. So in my journal, there's a picture of Adolf Hitler in one of his speeches where he's got his hand raised. And he says, "So, are you an Adolf Hitler fan?" And I said, "No." Again, I thought it was noteworthy. And he said, "Oh, you find Adolf Hitler to be noteworthy?" And I said, "Yeah, actually I do. But you're not a fan." And I said, "No." And he said, "So why do you find this picture to be noteworthy?" I said, "Mr. Apple, have you ever read Mein Kampf?" And he said, "No, I haven't." And I said, "Well, you should. And the German people should have. Because Adolf Hitler wrote Mein Kampf in prison. And in that book, he detailed every single thing he would do if he ever got into power. And then he took power and he did all of those horrible atrocities that he said he was going to do if he ever got into power." And George Apple says, "So why do you find that noteworthy?" And I said, "Because Adolf Hitler is a reminder to me that you should never underestimate somebody." And then I just cracked a big shit-eating grin right in his face. And he knew in that moment exactly what I was saying. You got set up and you got played. I knew what was in that book from front to fucking back, and there was so many reasons I had put it together. I never actually thought it would see the light of day, but the ultimate reality in this case is he did not see me coming. He did not prepare for me. He thought he was going to have a slam dunk case because, like I said, he thought I was some bumbling hillbilly from Texas. Amanda told him. She said, "Do not underestimate this guy. He is the smartest guy I have ever met in my life. And if there is any way out of this, he will find it." And of course, George Apple ignored it because she was a complete imbecile. And so when you've got some really dumb girl, like my boyfriend's really smart, he's probably like, "Yeah, I'm sure he's a genius. I'm sure, you know, Cowboy over here is a genius." And so his final fucking, you know, shot in the dark is to try to paint me out to be a white supremacist. And I got to twist that into a dunk on his face that you are standing here in this situation, that you're standing in here getting ready to lose this fucking case because you underestimated me. And that's what the German people and the world did with Adolf Hitler. And it's what we're doing again with the government that is slowly but surely taking our rights away from me. And so it was very near to that point where he had had enough and realized that he was never going to get me to say anything that was going to help his case. And he finally dismissed me from the stand, and both the prosecution and the defense rested their cases. When I sat down at the jury, sat down with Leonard, he was like, "This thing's in the bag. Like, you did a great job. couldn't ask anything more from you. You did, you handled yourself perfectly well. But he said, what's to come next is closing arguments. And he said, this is going to be one of the toughest parts for you because you've just gotten through giving your narrative and putting together a cohesive argument about everything that happened that night. And closing arguments are more of an editorial, and they're going to get to go last. He said, so I'm going to make my closing arguments, and then the prosecution gets to go last. And so the last thing that the jury hears before they go back to deliberate will be whatever the prosecution says. And so the key points in Leonard's closing arguments were pure and simply that, again, this was a total travesty for a case like this to have ever been brought on such little evidence. At the end of the day, it should have never seen the light of courtroom. It was a he said, she said case that never added up in any way, shape, or form, and the state had been overzealous in their prosecution of me. And he polled the jury and he reminded them in his closing arguments. He said, "There's the most important thing for you to understand is what your duty is here today. Your duty is not to go back and, you've heard the testimony, you've taken your notes. We thank you for your service. When you go back into that jury room, the thing that I want you to remember is that your duty as an American citizen is not to determine whether Mr. Van Dusen is innocent of his crimes." Okay? Innocent means that you believe he did absolutely nothing wrong. Your job is to determine whether he is guilty or not guilty. You are to determine whether the state has proved that he did each item on the list and that they have proved them beyond a reasonable doubt. It is not enough that you think he might have done it or could have done it or maybe did it or it looks a little bit like it's possible. Your job, he said, you have to believe 100% beyond a reasonable doubt that Mr. Van Dusen is definitively guilty of all of these crimes as they are charged in order to find him guilty of these crimes. And if there is any room for doubt in your mind, then you must find him not guilty. This is not a case of innocence versus guilt. It's a case of not guilty versus guilty. And the prosecution in this case did not prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. And I hope that is what you will find, agree to in your deliberations. Thank you. And so then George Apple comes out there, and for some weird reason, the prosecution is able to retell the narrative just off the cuff. So when they retell the narrative, they tell basically her version of the narrative, except instead of my bumbling idiot wife who can't remember and doesn't know for sure and yammer, he gets to tell the narrative in his much more powerful and direct manner, and he makes it sound, God damn these lights, he makes it sound far more scary and real than she did. So he retells the whole narrative with the strangulation and the gun pointing and how she must have felt when she heard the click of the dry fire and how close I got to blowing her head off. And it doesn't matter the things that she doesn't remember. You have to understand, this woman thought she was going to die. And some of you have testified that you remember in grave detail the events that led to what you thought were your impending death. But, not everybody's of the same mental capacity. There was drugs and alcohol involved. And so you cannot pass judgment on her purely because she does not have perfect recall of the events. There is proof of every one of her claims. Clearly on the 911 call, she was very upset. There is no evidence to suggest that this was fabricated in any way. Mr. Van Dusen threatened to kill his wife. He tried to strangle her. He harassed her, and he unlawfully imprisoned her in her house and made her afraid for her life. And that is the truth of this case. And so when you go back into that room, that is the verdict basically, that we expect you to come to. You know, the life and the safety and the sanctity of this woman and her minor child are in your hands. Do not let this man sell you this story and convince you of some bullshit narrative so that he can go back out into society and victimize somebody else. And it's like, holy shit, you know? I'm feeling so good about how everything is gone. I mean, from day one, everything has just, like, the pieces, the dominoes are just falling one by one into my favor. My entire presentation was amazing. I was able to get him to open the door and bring in evidence that he didn't want into the trial. I was able to get him to totally lose his composure. I was able to get the jury to laugh at him, so much so that the judge had to come to his defense. I mean, can you imagine the judge is having to scold the jury to stop laughing at the prosecuting attorney? He was like a child in the courtroom. Everything had gone so horribly wrong for him. But the last thing they heard was that scary, terrible narrative that he just painted, and it scared the fucking shit out of me. And so that was it. That was it. That was the end of the day. The jury was dismissed to go and deliberate. And I think they actually were called back to start deliberations the following day. I think there were no deliberations the day of. They were ordered back to the courtroom first thing in the morning to start deliberations. And so I believe it was like 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock in the morning maybe. I don't remember exactly. I'm pretty sure it was before lunch. It could have been after. I don't recall. The cop in my unit calls me and says, "Mike, it's time." And so here it goes. The night before, I talked to my dad on the phone. He'd asked me how I felt trial went, and I said, "You know what? I don't know how the verdict is going to go. But the one thing I can say is that I have been very, very impressed with the American criminal justice system. Like, by the time it got to trial, I felt like I was afforded everything that would help me to be able to prove my innocence. It definitely did not feel like things were weighted against me. If anything, it felt like things were heavily weighted in my favor. I felt like we got a good jury. I felt like we got a jury that paid attention, that cared, that listened to the details. Obviously, my testimony was flawless. I felt great about everything, and I just told him, I was like, this was closing arguments. And my dad was like, "I know, man." He was like, "I'm with you." He's like, I think you're going to get a fair trial. I think this jury really gives a shit about this case and this verdict. I think they're gonna weigh it seriously." And he said, "But I'm with you." Until those closing arguments that he gave, I thought this thing was in the bag. And I was like, well, you know, it's done. You know, and it feels good to be done. You know, like, you spend all these months waiting and wondering how you're going to be able to comport yourself on the stand. Are you going to get caught? Are you going to do something stupid? And I was through the tough part, and now, like, I had done everything I could do. Now it was up to a jury of my peers to decide my fate. I went to bed again the next night, surprisingly at peace. Woke up the next morning, and eventually I got that call that the verdict was in. And this starts the most, I mean, I can feel the fucking hairs all over my body standing up. Like, there's no way to express what that feels, because when you get that phone call, and whether you're on the streets or you're in county, you know your fate has been decided. The die has been cast, but you have not observed it yet. But it's set. You know what I mean? Everything that is going to become the next days and years and months of your life has now been determined. And so I have to start that long process of getting shackled up at the door, taken down the elevator, put into a holding cell, put into more shackles. The cops get their guns. We go through the tunnel. The cops empty their guns. They lead me into the courtroom, and they stand me at the bench. And the judge says, you know, "Bailiff, please bring in the jury." I'm vibrating. Like if my whole body could vibrate like a motor that was just humming, like I am tingling and it's like a panic attack and an adrenaline rush, and it's just like so many things all boiled into one. And so the judge asked the jury, "Have you reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor." Well, when the jury walked in, juror number 1, who again, I mean, this guy was like a fucking angel. Juror number 1 is the first person in the door. I'm standing at the table looking at the jurors entering the door, and juror number 1 kind of goes like this. He just kind of gives me another one of these like, "You're going to be okay." And so I was like, okay, fuck. Maybe. And then like multiple of the jurors looked at me, and they looked at me softly. The feeling that I got was that they were trying to give me some peace. You know what I mean? And so, but I'm still humming. Like there's no way. And so they say, "Have you reached a verdict?" "Yes, we have." They hand the verdict to the fucking judge. By the way, the judge, the entire trial fucking hates my face. Every time there's an objection that he can rule for or against, he rules against me. He was his name was Judge Thorpe. Total scumbag piece of shit. He ruled against me in every conceivable way. He was not objective. He was convinced that I was guilty. He didn't care about any of the evidence, the facts, the reason, the logic, nothing. He wasn't even paying attention when I was talking half the time. This guy was so biased and one-sided, it was disgusting. And when he looked at the thing, I swear to God, I could feel him get pissed off. And that was the second like little piece of, okay, here we go. So, count 1, assault 2 with a deadly weapon. The jury finds the defendant not guilty. Man, in that moment, like the wave of emotion that poured over me. This is just the first count, but it's the most important count. This count, like I said, this count carries the most prison sentence on this list. We're looking at a minimum of 6 years on this one account. So basically, the majority of the fucking trial hinges on the very first count, assault 2 with a deadly weapon. And so when he says those words, "not guilty," the level of relief that just washes over your body is unbelievable. But this is step number 1. There's still a lot of bad shit. As to count 2, assault 2 by means of strangulation, we the jury find the defendant not guilty. So that's both of the strikes. No strikes, no serious violent crimes. Both of the big ones are now gone. As to count 3, we the jury find the defendant guilty. And so, for a second you're feeling like, man, maybe I'm gonna walk out of here. But I knew that the likelihood of walking was slim, because I knew that, like Leonard and I had said in the beginning, you can't just go in there in a case like this and say, "I'm an angel, I was innocent." And whether you agree with it or not, the reality was, when she ran to that door at the end of the night, when she ran to the door and she did not have my son in her possession, and I tried to stop her, by the letter of the law, that is unlawful imprisonment. And so, while this feels like a fucked up thing to me, I was honest and I admitted to what I did, and the jury heard that and they convicted me on it. As to count 4, harassment with a deadly weapon, we find the defendant not guilty. As to the final account, they had what was called a lesser included, which was the final assault account, they converted it to a lesser included, which means you think that there was some form of an assault that took place, the banging her on the head, but you don't think that it was a serious violent charge. You think that it was a relatively minor scuffle. And so you can decide, if you don't agree that it's an assault 2, you can find what's called the lesser included misdemeanor assault 4. And so they rightly found me guilty for the misdemeanor assault 4, but in a felony case, it's like it might as well not even exist. They don't even care about that. So then the last piece, however, because at this point I'm only facing 3 to 9 months. Unlawful imprisonment for a first-time offender carries a maximum sentence of 9 months. I've already been in for 7. Chances are I'm time served and I'm going home until they polled the jury, or until they read that as to the weapons enhancement, the jury found that the weapon enhancement did apply to the unlawful imprisonment account. And so that forced me to get a mandatory 18-month weapon enhancement. So what actually happened, though, was when they added the enhancement to the charge, they were done reading all the charges. They polled the jurors independently and said, is this the verdict of the court? Is this your verdict? And several of the jurors said, this is the verdict of the court. This is not my verdict. And so because they were not unanimous, they had to go back into the fucking jury room for further deliberation. And so I'm talking to Leonard and I'm like, what's going on here? And he said, I don't know. There's clearly some detail to this that they don't agree on. And I said, well, what if they can't agree? And he said, well, they're going to agree, because otherwise this is going to get dragged out. But they're going to agree. And he said that, but otherwise it will be a hung jury and they'll have to drop the entire case. So they were back there for a little while, and then they requested information on the weapons enhancement. They requested to reread the statutes on the weapon enhancement. And so what turned out was likely jurors 1 and 2 and 3 and 6, and several of them did not agree that the weapons enhancement should have been placed onto my charge because it was not used in the commission of the crime. Unfortunately, per the statute in the state of Washington, I didn't have, if I had used the weapon actually in the commission of a crime, then it would have been assault 2 with a deadly weapon. The fact that the handgun was on my person when I tried to prevent her from leaving the house, the jury was required by law to add the 18-month weapon enhancement to the charge. And so when the jury came back in and they read the verdict, and they had to all agree that it was their verdict. Again, I'm looking at the jury, and these people, man, they felt for me. And you could tell, like, there was a lot of eye contact. There was they're not allowed to really do much, but there was like some gestures coming in the form of like nods and certain facial expressions that was like, basically like, we did our best for you. Best of luck for you. Like, I hope you're the guy that you say you are. And of course, the whole time, that juror 12, man, she never actually bought a lick of the story, which really goes back to the point that I made, about how important picking a jury is. Like, this woman had decided I was fucking guilty before I ever even took the stand, which is unfortunate. Thankfully, I had other jurors, just some of the most human people I've ever had exposure to. If one of you people happens to come across this video, I cannot express my gratitude and appreciation for your service, for you sitting through those days and missing your family and missing your jobs and treating me fairly like a human being. You gave me a second chance at life, and you made it possible for me to become the man that I am, and the husband that I am, and the father that I am. And I want you to know that I ended up getting the kids that were involved in that. She was the liar that she claimed to be, and she still is today. So you guys definitely made the right decision. So at that point, the jury is exited from the courtroom, and I'm kind of giving my nods and bows. And the most unbelievable close to this entire story, if you can imagine, this prosecutor, George Apple, who's just been this total prick, has just handled a massive loss. I mean, they threw everything but the kitchen sink at me, trying to send me to prison for 12 years that turned into 7 years, and then I just got 18 months and some little over 18 months. And I had offered them I had offered to plead guilty to 3 charges, one of which was a serious violent and do up to 36 months in prison. That's what I offered. He laughed our offer out of his office. And so I took the fucking stand in my own defense and was sentenced to half of what I offered him, with no violent charges, no strikeable offenses, nothing. And so when the jury left, you know, I'm kind of like hugging my family. Is able to come. The cops let them kind of like touch me for like a quick hug, you know. Leonard's shaking my hand. And George Apple, the prosecutor, turns to Leonard and to me. And he looks at me and he looks at Leonard and he manages this big smile on his face. And he sticks his hand out and he said, "Congratulations, Leonard. You won." And that was just like the seal on the fucking deal. Leonard shook his hand, and Leonard turned to me and he said, "Very rarely do I congratulate somebody on catching their first felony charge." But he said, "Considering everything that you were up against and everything that we just went through, I feel like some congratulations are in order." I just fucking, I just wrapped my arms around him. He'd already confirmed that the charge that I was convicted of, the charge that I admitted to, the crime that I admitted to committing, was a non-violent offense, which meant that I was not going to go to the really scary, bad, closed custody prison. I was going to go to a minimum security work camp, and he's like, "Man, believe it or not, in a year, you're gonna be shocked. Like, man, you're probably getting ready to go have a bunch of fun. As much as I hate to admit it, our prison system here is pretty lax, and you're going to a work camp we'll see, sentencing hasn't occurred yet, but for some time period less than 2 years, and you're gonna be eating good and playing horseshoes and playing ping pong." And he's like, "You're gonna be all right, man." And so there you have it. That is the close to this insane event. I know that this video has run very long, but I didn't want to keep you guys that are like have admitted to being on the edge of your seats waiting any longer. This is what happened. And so there's been a couple of people in the audience that have suggested that I'm lying about this. So what I happen to have in closing is the certified document from Snohomish County that says a sentencing hearing was held and the defendant's lawyer and the deputy prosecuting attorney were present. Part 2 findings: there being no reason why judgment should not be pronounced, the court finds the current offenses. The defendant was found guilty on August 29th, 2008 by a jury verdict to count 3 unlawful imprisonment with a deadly weapon. And here is the paperwork. And here is the charge. So for whoever it was that said, if I had any balls, I would produce the paperwork. There's your fucking paperwork. Every single thing that I've said since I sat down here is true. I just wanted to share my experience with you because this is something that happens to people all day, all over America. And our justice system is not designed to really get to the truth. It's designed to send the maximum number of people to prison. And you have got to fight, man. If you are charged with a crime that you did not commit, or you're charged with a crime that you think that you can beat, the criminal justice system in this country affords you every opportunity to stand in your own defense or to stand with an attorney, and you can and will be able to do that if you comport yourself in the right way, because at the end of the day, it is not these corrupt judges and these corrupt attorneys that are going to decide your fate. It's men and women just like me and my wife and you and your loved ones. It's American citizens who, at the end of the day, know that all of us have done things we regret. Most of the people in this country have committed felonies far worse than mine that they just never got caught up on, that nobody snitched on them. Pretty much anybody in America could have easily found themselves right where I was, and the chances are that some number of the people that you get on your jury are going to understand that very well. And they are very, very forgiving if you are capable of admitting to what you did, taking responsibility for your actions, and then standing in defense of whatever was not yours. And in my case, it worked out very, very well. So much so that the prosecutor himself said, "Congratulations, Leonard, you won." So there you have it. Thank you very much to everyone who sat through these very long hours of video. I did end up going to prison for a little under 2 years. I spent the majority of that in a prison work camp, but I did go through a classification process in a closed custody facility. So if anybody has any interest in hearing my prison stories, I would leave that in the comment section below, and I will sit down here and I will tell you exactly what you can expect if you ever get sentenced to prison, or at least prison camp in Washington State, because it is not what you would imagine. So there you have it. As always, thank you for watching this video, and we'll see you on the next one.